Hey guys, it's Billy with HP Auto, and today I've got a 2004 pre-LP Gallardo, and I wanted to basically go over this car for a second time. I know I did one previously with my personal car, which I've since sold. We've got another one in inventory, and I figured it would be a great opportunity to kind of just revisit some things that are common issues with these cars to look for when you're purchasing one, and also just some things to know about as you own a Lamborghini, what to expect and what can occur. This is a 2004. It's got about 18,000 miles on it. It's a really nice option car, and it's been taken really good care of. So it's a great example to use to kind of show you guys what to expect when there's a good, clean example to purchase, and just some things that you'll see potentially fail or just be common problems. We'll just do a nice little walk around of it. This is pretty much a stock car. It's been lowered on the stock suspension. It does have an aftermarket carbon fiber spoiler. It does have a lock exhaust on it. Somebody switched out the wheels to the two-piece wheels. Other than that, it's a very, very clean example of what to expect in a nice 04 Gallardo. A common misconception is 04 Gallardos are absolute terrible cars. That's not always true. The trick is with these cars is finding a car that's been maintained correctly and has all of the history documented correctly, so you'll kind of know what you're getting into. Another thing to think about too is with these cars, some of the factory settings aren't the greatest. So if somebody comes in here behind the factory settings and makes a couple adjustments to the PIS on the clutch, that can also help with some of the complaints people have about the jerky clutch and whatnot. There's also some, aftermarket upgrades like the pedal commander. Another issue on the earlier Gallardos is the rods. 04 to 05s. I've seen rod bearing failure, but generally the reason that is because incorrect oil is not being used. So we 100% recommend using Motul 300V 2050 with 5,000 mile intervals or 1 year intervals. Another good thing to do is periodically have an oil analysis test done to check, just to kind of see what the status of the engine is based off the breakdown of materials inside of it. And you can do that with just a simple oil test with like Blackstone Labs or something like that. So some of the things that I commonly see on these cars. Now this car doesn't have a front end lift, but I do see the front end lifts from time to time, they leak. Good news is we can rebuild those. So if you have a front end leak on your Gallardo, we've developed a kit to replace all the seals internally and stop the leaks. And we have, access to machine shops that can make parts if necessary, which we've had to do before. Another common issue is the lower control arms. These are pretty common on all pre-LP Gallardos to fail. And we actually came up with a kit to fix that. Basically, we will machine out the lower ball joint, replace it with a serviceable unit, and that can save you several $1,000s. I believe the last time we checked, it was around $4,000 or $5,000 to replace the control arms on one of these. So that is something that we offer that we can do, and it's very reasonably priced, our kit. So if you're interested in having your lower control arms rebuilt, we do offer that service now, as well as rebuilding the lift kits. So another issue I've ran into is the actual lower control arm bolts coming loose. One of the things you can do with that is just have somebody that's familiar with these cars service it. So I'd highly recommend, I know sometimes it's easier to save a couple dollars going to, an Audi shop or a European shop, but I'd really strongly recommend paying a little bit extra to go to a specialist or the dealer that knows these cars. Lower control arm coming completely loose is a nightmare. That could cause you to wreck the car, get, injured, even death. So, I've seen the bolts come loose quite a few times on these cars, and that's just something somebody with experience knows to check on these cars. Another thing that's pretty common is the passenger side steering rack leaking. Once again, it's a really expensive part to replace. We do offer a rebuild kit for that now as well. If your passenger side, your steering rack's starting to leak, we can help with that. Something to think about when buying one of these cars. Another thing too, when you're looking at one, is you want to get up on the lift, because a lot of these cars have been previously salvaged or wrecked, and just basically inspect the brackets right here on the front bumper. Usually if they're cracked, that means the front bumper's been replaced. And a lot of times if it's got a LP bumper, it's been wrecked too. Not always, but usually that's definitely a sign to say, hey, let me just double check this to make sure the car ain't been wrecked. A lot of people also do it as well, just to obviously improve the appearance of the car. Pretty easy to figure out why it's tinted. It's basically to protect the dash, because all of the dash is exposed right here. So in my opinion, if you see a car with tinted windshield, you should be happy because they're trying to preserve the dash. That right there is the pump going on for the e-gear system. It's pretty common to hear those start up and run when you open the door up. Generally for 6 seconds or more is acceptable, but if it runs forever and ever and ever, that usually means there's some sort of actuator leak or something like that going on. Here is the inside of this car. It's optioned out really, really nice. As you can see, it's got the orange accents, so it's a very nice spec. One of the common problems I see is the reverse button, believe it or not. Sometimes they start to fail and you have to really push these really hard to get it to go into reverse. As far as the inside goes, sometimes the fitment of the parts can be questionable. If the car has been taken apart before, it's almost a guarantee some of the clips in these panels have broke. It's just a really quick way to find out if the car's been fully disassembled or not. This car does have an aftermarket head unit in it. I run the stock ones, but in the earlier cars, like the pre-LPs, I do favor an upgraded head unit because you have a backup camera if it's not factory in the car. To access the engine, you can't do it through the OBD port. You can access the clutch and other modules, but to get to the engine, you actually have to remove the passenger side floor panel and have to have an adapter to actually scan this car. You can have LAR 32, Texa. I don't think Badcom works on these. I haven't tried it. I know it works on the LP cars, but there's an adapter there you just hook up to. Not too big of a deal to get access to. There's a couple sites online that sell that, but getting the actual scan tool is the expensive part. Getting an all-tail will not work on this car. So if you have an all-tail Maxi Assist, it only works on LP cars. So that's something to keep in mind. This car does, we read the clutch on this car. It's similar like on the Ferrari. Basically, you look at the amount that the car is at currently, and then the amount when it was new. So I believe on this car it was 19.8 currently and 18.2. So you subtract those numbers, which gives you 1.6, and then multiply that by 14.8257. That's the calculation. So again, if you're checking the clutch, you need to pull up the parameter currently. So when I use Texa, I believe it's self-calibrated clutch position, and then you look at the clutch position since new. You take the calibrated position, which will be a higher number, subtract it from the new number. So in this car is 19.8 and 18.2, which is 1.6. You multiply by 14.8257, and that came up to be about 22 or 23% clutch use on this car. So it has had a clutch replaced, obviously, at the mileage point we're at, or either the person only drove on the highway. So yeah, I guess that's possible. As far as the engines of these cars go, some of these cars do consume more oil, especially the earlier models. I had a car with about 60,000 miles on it, and it consumed quite a bit of oil, but it ran strong. I drove it pretty aggressively and didn't have any issues with it. So that wasn't, a big concern for me, because I bought the car for the purpose of, R&D and, developing parts and upgrades for the car. So definitely 1 liter, sometimes more per 1,000 miles is kind of common. This car has been great. No oil consumption really with this car that I've noticed, so it's been really good. You will notice on the 08s they have different throttle bodies. I believe they're an Audi part number. 04 to 07 has these throttle bodies. So oil on startup usually means it's over full. It's real easy to fill the system, overfill the dry sump system. There's an article online on how to measure the oil. If you haven't, looked at it, it's pretty simple. But, making sure you have the correct amount of oil in it, definitely, it seems common, but, or like common sense, but it's an issue we run into quite a bit. So just make sure if you're seeing some oil consumption on startup, your oil level's correct. Another thing too is the valve guides and seals. I've seen some issues, not a lot with these cars, that can create heavy smoke. Like we talked about, the rods can sometimes be an issue as well. Actuators, it's not as, I haven't seen a ton of them, but I do see those become an issue at some points. The accumulators as well. I just replaced one of those not too long ago on an underground racing car. So that can be an issue. Another common issue is the exhaust valves will get unplugged, and that will throw a 1 through 5, 6 through 10 light on the dash. Another thing is actual actuators go bad too, or the flaps of valves can fail. A lot of times you can lubricate those and it'll take care of it, but quite a few people just bypass those, and it can throw check engine lights if not done correctly. Clutch on these cars is, I think, lasts a little bit better than people give credit for. One of the big things is just, don't sit in reverse too long, kind of just like on a Ferrari. And when you're shifting gears, try to be easy on the clutch, so to speak. Don't slip the clutch a whole lot, stop and go traffic. Just stuff like that will help, make the clutch last longer. Another thing I see on these cars is the tail light brackets break, and people will attempt to repair them. Just the plastic on these cars, if they've been taken apart a whole lot, can cause that issue. As you can see, these tail lights are nice and tight, which is a really good sign. Bumper brackets actually where this bolts to break as well, which usually means the bumper's been off a couple of times, but not always. The plastics is notorious for getting hard and brittle, so that is something that can be a problem and cause a headache. Another common issue is the oil pump shaft stripping out and the power steering shaft stripping out. And in some cases, you can actually, the actual mechanism inside the timing chain assembly, or the case where the actual shaft goes in for the power steering pump, will actually strip that out. If that happens, transmission has to come out. Very, very problematic. But power steering shafts are pretty common replacements, as well as some leaks too. It's not usually a big deal replacing the gasket in the shaft, but it can get to a point where it just strips the whole mechanism out. And I have seen some pretty subpar repairs, so to speak, where people try to weld the shaft and stuff. I just wouldn't do it. If you ever lose oil pressure, don't panic, cut the car off. It's very possible the shaft has stripped. I have seen some leaks with the front covers of these cars as well. Engine has to come out. Oh, I'm sorry, the rear covers. Or engine doesn't have to come out if you're doing the covers, but if you have the sump leak. If the sump starts to leak, engine has to come out. You have to split the sump from the bottom of the block. That can be a big problem. You can do the timing covers in the car actually, but that's just one of the things I see. A real simple mistake I see quite a bit is people forget to plug this back in when doing the oil change. Not too big of a deal, but I have seen it happen. Also, the pressure switch on the AC system, which is up here, you have to remove trunk assembly basically and a couple of connectors. There's a high pressure switch here that fails quite often on these cars. If your AC stops working, that's a big thing you want to take care of quick, because that sensor fails, you lose all the refrigerant in the system. It can totally wipe out the compressor because the air compressor is constantly spinning. It doesn't have a clutch on this car, so that can be a pretty frustrating situation. Speaking of that, there is a valve underneath the dash that can cause the heat not to work. The HVAC valve for the heater core. So if that fails, I've replaced a couple of those as well. I may have missed a couple of things, but those are pretty much the common things I see. Obviously, you're going to see some leaks on these cars because of the age. That's just kind of par for the course of any car as it gets older. You're going to see some hoses probably start to leak, which is kind of the same scenario. Obviously there is a couple updates to the later model LPs, but I wouldn't let that deter you from buying the 04 to 05, 06 models just because they're the very first models. You just want to make sure the clutch is set up correctly and the car is in good shape, and you check all the things out on it. So all in all, this is one of my favorite cars ever made. I think it's a bargain to get one of these cars. If you ever get tired of the e-gear, you can convert these to a manual transmission. We do offer that service. We're actually working on 2 right now currently. That is something to think about if you want a manual. Conversion can be done all the way up to a 2014 Squadra course if you want it done. But yeah, hopefully this was useful information, and thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe. And if you would like to see other content or have any questions, just comment below and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.